So our focus today is cataclysm, or destruction, or really degradation. These are difficult ideas and certainly difficult realities, but it's essential to enter into reflection on this aspect of the universe. And one way I thought of just introducing the idea is say you went to a party and you show up there, maybe you wake up there, and there's all this stuff going on, and then you have a person on your side who creeps up and says, "I'll tell you what's happening," because you don't know really what's taking place. It's not just humans; it's a whole bunch of different creatures. And the person says, "You can be part of the party for sure, but the cost is you have to periodically kill something and eat it. That's sort of the ticket for being part of the party, and you have to be aware that a couple more things. One is the people who are here and the creatures that are here are very different than the ones that used to be here. Because every now and then, who knows why, most of the people at the party die off. It happens at a kind of a regular time interval. And here's the last little bit you need to be aware of. Right now is the time for the beginning of yet another die-off. So enjoy yourself. And this is just a way of saying that we really have awakened to inside the story of life. We just come into this amazing realization of life's journey over 4 billion years. We're just waking up. And what we discovered is that every 100 million years, there has been this vast die-off of life, a catastrophe, a cataclysm, called a mass extinction spasm. So the question is why, and what's going on here. But the amazing thing is, and this is truly the news of our time, is that we have discovered we are right in the middle of one of these mass extinctions. The party, is in the midst of a mass die-off throughout all the different orders of life. So it's this question of the nature of life and how we can orient ourselves to this moment, especially given the fact that this horrendous thing is taking place right now. We have a particular difficult challenge here because of our tendency not to want to reflect on bad news. And, cataclysm is bad news. And it's especially difficult for the civilization that came out of Western Europe. So the modern industrial civilization, the way in which it was influenced by the birth of the modern period, has a hard time with this. And this goes back to some of the principal architects of the modern period, and this would be the reformers, the Protestant reformers, in particular Martin Luther and John Calvin. And their fixation on the idea that humans are in a fallen state, so that we are in a degraded form. And what is essential is to be transformed out of this state. And one of the evidences of our fallen state is the fact that we defecate. It is so defecation, degradation, cataclysm. All of these are realities that were hard to think about for someone like John Calvin. He has this one amazing moment. He's going on and on about we are mud and so forth, but he has this one amazing moment. It's priceless when he stops for a second and thinks, if we came from the stars, that would really be something. He says a little glimmer of a moment of what it means to be a human. He says, if we came from the stars, whoa. But then he remembers, but we don't. We come from the mud, and we are mud, and we'll always be mud. And this whole kind of gripped by the idea that what we are is unacceptable. And what is required is some kind of action that will take us out of this unacceptable place. It wasn't just the humans that are degraded. all of the earth was in a fallen state, is in a fallen state in this view. So everything has to be, you have to be saved from this and brought into a realm of sweetness, transcendent sweetness, somewhere else, not here. Now, even as this impulse within, say, the mainstream Christianity began to lose control of society, and a secular scientific society arose, what's amazing is that attitude went right into the scientific secular society, with the idea that we had to somehow engineer the world to make up for the difficulties of what it means to be a human, an animal who dies, defecates. You see, I think one way I think about it is that animals, I don't think they spend much time reflecting on the fact that they defecate. They just don't seem to. Like, there's nothing like the equivalent to John Calvin or Martin Luther. There's just not there. But that's the business of the human. We're so fascinated, we end up reflecting on things. We're not just animals who think and move. We're all animals who think and move and think about how we're doing that. So here is this mind emerging. Conscious self-awareness, it emerges. And it's so fabulous. And then it has to discover that it exists as a body that defecates. It's almost too much to handle. You see, it's just like, no, I'm not going to accept it. I come from the glorious realm elsewhere, right? The eternal realm, where everything is spotless, stainless steel, clean, like a porcelain toilet that hasn't been used yet. No, it's like this identification with a non-earthly realm. And then so the drive then is to recreate our world so that it's free from the negative aspects of what it means to be human. And the culmination of this, one culmination of this, is the place that everyone wants to go to. During the 20th century in America, the number one destination point was Disneyland. It was the deep desire to go to Disneyland. You've got to go to Disneyland, and you've got to initiate your children into Disneyland. And in Disneyland, you walk into Disneyland, and everything is engineered and controlled. Nothing is going to run astray. And all the animals, Mickey and so forth, have no genitals. So there's no defecation taking place there. All right. But I mean, this is serious business, because this is the ideal way to live. The Disneyland version. And then our cities and so forth, we construct our cities to keep us away from nature and sort of above the world. This whole impulse to somehow create technology that will fix and save us from the negative aspects of what it means to be human, to be Earth. It is, and now in what is more kind of comical forms, but maybe not comical, is the way in which it's driving scientists to invent ways to eliminate death. See, it's the idea that this is what it really means to be human. It means to be bright and happy and friendly, right? And then when you're sick and degraded and miserable, that's not human. Well, I'm saying that that's not the view I'm trying to explore here. The view is that all of these states are what it really means to be human. And all of these powers are what it really means to be universe. We talked about emergence before, creativity. That's the bright, happy side. Now it's cataclysm, where things are broken down. That is also as essential to reality as emergence. They all go together. Now, in the scientific world, this is referred to as the second law of thermodynamics, just to identify how the scientists have articulated this. And it is regarded as, in many ways, the most fundamental law in physics. The law that things break down, things fall apart. So that this dynamic is what enables the universe to operate. It's the breakdown of the molecules that enables a body to live. So they go together. So the question we might ask is, what would be the way in which Cataclysm operates in the universe? And the most relevant is that in order for a body to live, it needs energy. So every body needs a flow of energy, and the energy is gotten by breaking down complex molecules into simple molecules. And that movement from the complex to the simple is called catabolism. So it's related to the idea of cataclysm. It's about things breaking down. So everywhere you move, everywhere you go, there's simultaneously this breakdown and this building up. It happens every day, every moment, with every breath. And when you walk into a forest, there's a rising and falling of life, because with every birth, there is a death. But to look at a larger image of cataclysm, we go even beyond the earth and look at the stars themselves. The stars are all part of the rising and falling. They have their moment of building up and their moment of falling down. And the one I wanted to talk to you about is what happens to a star that happens to be around 20 times the size of our sun. A star of that size. So it has a great beginning. So much promise. You have this vast cloud drawn together, and we have, with a buildup of temperature in the middle, as we referred to earlier, when the temperature gets to a certain level, like 10 million degrees, an amazing thing happens. The hydrogen atoms are so excited, they fuse together and form helium nuclei. And that is the birth of the star. Amazing. You have hydrogen being transformed into helium. And in that transformation, light is released. Energy is released. It's a great new day in the sky. It's just terrific. This a star that size will burn for 10 million years. I say burn. It will burn hydrogen for 10 million years, constantly building up helium. After 10 million years, all the hydrogen is used up. And so you have now at the center of the star, get a picture of this, you had all this energy being released by the development of helium. Now that is over because there's no more hydrogen to burn. So the pressure out drops off, and the star then implodes because it's not being pushed away. And as it implodes, the temperature in the middle soars. So it goes from around 10 million degrees to 100 million degrees. Now, in a certain sense, it could just go forever, but at 100 million degrees, you have the helium starting to burn. So you have 3 helium come together, and they form carbon. Awesome moment. Carbon. This is happening right now in the universe. You have these stars that are burning helium, forming carbon. If a star is not large enough, it will simply burn the helium and form the carbon for the rest of its life. And then when it's done burning the helium, it compacts down into just the carbon. And the carbon itself forms this massive crystal that we call a white dwarf star. It's not exactly a star. It's just these names that hold on. It's actually a massive diamond burning at millions of degrees of heat. So literally the sky with white dwarfs is filled with these massive diamonds burning out there. If, however, the star is large enough, it will crush that diamond down further till the carbon begins to burn. Carbon burns for now just 1,000 years, making oxygen. Uses up the carbon. Oxygen starts to burn, creates silicon. But when silicon burns, it only burns for a week. Now we're at, amazingly, a time when we come to the end of a whole sequence, because iron itself this is being created here. Iron cannot burn. Iron takes in more energy than it will release. So the whole sequence is over. It's over, it's over, it's over. Iron won't burn. The star goes up to 10 billion degrees, which is so hot that the photons that are roaring around disintegrate all of the structure in the star. Now the very, very outer layers, there is some hydrogen left over from the burning, because there's not enough pressure for it to burn there. Inside that, there's the helium that's left over from the earlier burning. You see? You have the carbon left over. So it's like an onion with these different layers of structure, all these elements. But at this point, the star cannot survive any longer. And it collapses down and goes from a large star down to a point in just 2 seconds. 2 seconds. And in that moment, because of the temperature being so high, every atom that was there is destroyed. And even the particles themselves are destroyed in that the protons, the electrons are forced together to form neutrons. They're just jammed together, and you have at the very, very bottom of this collapse, just 2 seconds later, a tiny dot we call a pulsar or a neutron star. Now, if this took, say, some 10 million years, here's the point. You've got 10 million years dedicated to building up structure, which is then eliminated in 2 seconds. That's cataclysm at work. It's what the universe does. So it's just like all over. I mean, things looked like they were working out, right? I mean, we were getting used to the way things were, and it's just over. There's an event like this, of this magnitude, on the average once a century in the Milky Way galaxy. But throughout the universe, regularly, moment after moment after moment, cataclysm at work. But to move the same kind of action, I guess the other thing I want to say is that this procedure, this cataclysmic procedure, is built into the very nature of the interactions themselves. That even from the very beginning of time, when you look at the physical interactions, it was, in a certain sense, inevitable that we'd be building stars like this, and they'd have this collapse at the end. I want to just choose one example from Earth to talk about cataclysm, and that is one mass extinction, just the most dramatic of all. It took place at the end of the Permian, the end of the Paleozoic. These are geological terms, but 250 million years ago. On this planet, life was good. And then cataclysm comes roaring in. And it's hard to imagine. 96% of the marine species were obliterated. 96%. Maybe 70% of the land species. It's harder to estimate them. Just major destruction of life. My little point I want to get across here is that we didn't know about this until like yesterday. Plato couldn't imagine extinction. I think it's worth reflecting on. We're discovering something that went beyond the imagination of some of our archetypal thinkers. Confucius never talks about extinction. Right? Buddha never talks about extinction. It just escaped the mind. Even Emerson couldn't imagine extinction. That's the 19th century. We didn't discover extinction was real until the 19th century. That's kind of amazing. Like for instance, we found bones and things, and you sort of wonder, well, when they conclude that these were extinct animals? No, I mean they didn't. One example is take a person who's a colossal intellect. That's Thomas Jefferson. Thomas Jefferson was aware of these bones and so forth, and one of the reasons he authorized the Louisiana Purchase and the Lewis and Clark expedition was because of his sense that maybe they'd find the dinosaurs. This is Thomas Jefferson, right? So just the idea that a life form could go extinct escaped human imagination until the 19th century. It's that colossal of an idea. And so now to learn that there was a time when 96% of life vanished. That's the dimension of cataclysm. Just to give you one example. You know the trilobites? Well, I've seen these little pictures of the trilobites scurrying across these ancient seas. Lots of tons of species of trilobites doing really well. One of the things that they're known for is that they invented the first eye. You probably didn't know that. The trilobites invented the first eye, and it was made out of crystal, made out of calcite. That's impressive, right? Come up with an eye made out of a rock, that's transparent. They did this. They found this way to organize themselves and to thrive. And you know how long they thrived? 100 million years. And at the Permian mass extinction, there wasn't one left. All gone. Just gone. So even though it escaped our consciousness extinction, it didn't escape the power of the universe. Extinction was happening in a huge way all the time. So then, in confronting this question of cataclysm, the question we have to ask ourselves is, how do we become a form of cataclysm? How do we enable this power to proceed through conscious self-awareness? That's the overriding question we're asking here. And the way I'd like to think about this with you is to suggest that the cataclysm that's taking place on the planet today, like I said before, the scientists have determined that after 65 million years, without a cataclysm at the level of mass extinction, we're in the middle of one. I'd like to suggest the cataclysm taking place today permeates our lives. Now, we may have just learned about this in a scientific way. We can measure it empirically, and so we can say, yes, the cataclysm is taking place. But the interconnected nature of the Earth community, the interconnected nature of this Gaian reality in which we live in, communicates in a deep way, so that whether or not we intellectually know about the cataclysm, whether or not we know the empirical evidence about the mass extinction, we are in the middle of it, and it permeates even our feelings and our actions and our behavior one way or another. So I think that is the way in which to begin thinking about cataclysm. I would say that all of the trauma that we are experiencing, such as millions of children under the age of 5 dying every year needlessly, just for the lack of fresh water. There's no reason for this to be taking place. But there are millions of children dying needlessly. A huge number of the species in the oceans, something like a third, are on the verge of dying out altogether. They're just on the edge of falling off into mass extinction. So that in the 20 to 40,000 species a year are going extinct. So this is what is happening. And the huge number on the verge of going extinct. And we, in different ways, feel this. We take it into our relationships. We take it into our work. And then how does it surface? What does it feel like? It feels like being in the pressure cooker of this star that's collapsing. It feels like being inside of a vice. And so in other words, what I'm saying is that it's possible, given the cleverness of the human mind, it's possible to hide consciousness from the reality of this. So we can hide inside of Disneyland of whatever sort, right? We can hide inside there and fill our consciousness with certain kinds of distractions. But at the same time, at a deeper level, the heart level, the body level, we're all in this together. We feel it. And the sense of feeling in the same kind of compression as a star, and of feeling trapped, and of feeling absolutely locked in, and there's no way out. Everywhere we look, there's no escape. This sense of frustration, I think, is what is the way in which we feel in the midst of the cataclysm. And the power itself of Cataclysm is surging through the entire Earth community, and we feel it with this ongoing conviction of failure, of regret, and like I say, frustration, because it's just so hard to imagine how to proceed. And the part that is so galling is that everything that we worked for is being torn apart. And our deepest ideals, what organize entire nations, these seem to be just dissolving. This isn't what we expected to see. We had dreams of how we were going to create such a fantastic world. And this, things are going to get better, and we were just so wrapped up in this. And whether or not it was through technology or through spiritual transformation, we had these dreams of creating such a beautiful world, and now it is the opposite. And there seems to be simply no way out. So then the question is, how are we to orient ourselves in the midst of all this? And my suggestion is we are to consider identifying with the power that is destroying us. We are to take seriously the idea that we are to embrace the very power of Cataclysm that is tearing us apart. It is happening. Cataclysm is going to happen. And the choice before us is whether or not we are going to participate consciously, so that possibly we will enable some of the destruction to take place in a way that isn't as horrendous as it might be otherwise. So what does it mean, though, to have this power sweeping through us? It's the way in which those structures of our lives have become maladaptive. They're no longer leading to a vibrant world. And sorting that out, of course, is a major challenge, but enabling the power of Cataclysm to carry its work out by surrendering those aspects of ourselves that we used to think of as being ourselves. Surrendering them and allowing them to be torn apart and shredded. It is easy to have the idea that we should transform and become sources of energy and life. That's an idea. And the deepest transformation in the universe doesn't happen at the level of idea. It happens at the level of body. That's where the real structure is held. And so the way in which we are being torn apart is at that level. It's a level of heart, it's a level of body. Mind as well. But it is enabling the universe to pulverize those aspects that are carrying out the destruction. What would be an example? Take a person who was part of the whole consumer culture of the United States. I could go elsewhere, but the United States has really developed a powerful consumer culture. And watching TV and with the kids and become ever more sort of engrossed in that world, and then living a life that enables you to provide all of these things that are celebrated by the advertisements for the children, and then noticing, they don't want to go to school, or they have a difficult time studying, or they don't have that kind of drive for excellence, and their minds are becoming dull. Right? They're not able to really soar the way you want them to. And so then you start to argue with them, and then there's this tension builds up, and then pretty soon you're fighting. And why? How? What? You've given them everything that is advertised. They should be happy. You should be happy. No, you're screaming at each other, and you're being told as a parent that I hate you. So that we find ourselves in the midst of immense pain and misery. But only that has the strength to break down those categories. The question is, what will make it through the cataclysm? It won't be consumerism. What will make it through the cataclysm is the love that you have for your child that was distorted into this false idea that the way to express that love is through this consumer culture. So that shredding apart and to to begin to see the way in which the difficult and destructive aspects that we're experiencing are aligned with the way in which the earth is reconfiguring itself to leave this former era, one way or another, the former era of the Cenozoic, to find a way to align in our own daily lives that destructive activity that the earth is carrying out, so that we can free ourselves, liberate ourselves from the very forms that are causing the destruction. Another so this question of orienting ourselves to this power of cataclysm, enabling this power to tear down that which is no longer adaptive. Another way to think about this is that our challenge as humans is to enable the power of cataclysm to flow into our intellectual criticism of the structures of our civilization. I mean the way in which, for instance, we are educating, so that the criticism of our educational systems comes from the power of cataclysm itself. We are educating our young people not to actually enter into a relationship in the earth community that might be mutually enhancing. That isn't the goal of our educational system. Our educational system is designed to treat those cognitive skills necessary to carry out the work that industrial society is involved with. And the majority of that work is destroying the planet. So the cataclysm itself is the way in which, passing through the neocortex is the way in which the earth itself is reconfiguring its order. It's reordering itself at a very basic level. And then the criticism of all the different sectors of our society, and in this way in which the cataclysm gives us the power of staying with the criticism rather than being lured into a compromise situation given the various ways of enticement that our industrial world has. So by enabling the destruction of the earth to be the ground out of which we think, we enable cataclysm to proceed in a more conscious way. Then another question that I've been thinking about with these powers is what would be some of the qualities of the human consciousness that would reflect the cataclysm, the power of cataclysm alive within the human. Now, the major one, of course, is this idea of identifying with cataclysm, but in a more microphase sense, cataclysm shows up in humans that have a keen sensitivity to tension. They're aware of the inherent tension. Sometimes it's subtly present, and they can notice this and even amplify it. So they will walk into any kind of setting, and they just know how they can feel the tension. And they have kind of a desire to enhance it. There's a great story of Tennessee Williams, the playwright. Every time he'd go to a party, there would be a fight. And he was the one that started it. So he'd be there and he'd be talking to people and he'd get a sense of what's going on. He'd say the right little word that kind of like made it a little bit bigger over here, then bigger over here. And pretty soon you have the whole place fighting. I mean, it's like a love of that dramatic tension and conflict. With the sense here, the sense is this, that by deepening the tension, it's a way of avoiding avoidance. So you just, with avoidance, you let all these tensions stay below the surface, whereas the cataclysmic personality wants to bring them out with the sense that healing can only happen if these things are flying and alive. Another dimension of the human personality involved with cataclysm is a tendency towards polarities, black and white, good guy, bad guy, whatever it might be, and to see things in those simplistic terms, kind of stark orientation. And some of the negative forms have to do with this sense of like impending disaster. So there's a way in which a person with the sensibilities to respond to cataclysmic energies can sink into a cynicism or a nihilism. I mean, they're never surprised by human stupidity. Right? They just expect viciousness. I mean, of course. I mean, what'd you expect? So it's like the opposite of the naive personality they're deeply tuned into. Those the negative aspects, the destructive aspects, tuned into them. But at the same time, what's interesting is that people with this sensitivity often are comics or comedians, because it's a way in which to manage the tensions, the kind of surprise. And if you notice, not all humor, but a lot of humor will have that. It'll move in a certain direction, you see, and then suddenly it'll switch, go a different direction. Like the joke, I bought my mother-in-law a new chair, and now they won't let me plug it in. So it's that you go in a certain direction and you come back in the other, and but it's that sense that this would be the idea that we can really we can expect that by deepening attention it can lead to like an upwelling of health. Okay, I want to end with two remarks about Cataclysm. And the first is a personal story, which meant a lot to me, and I think it bears on this question of a human response to Cataclysm. And that a few years ago, I was part of a conference at which it was organized by Mikhail Gorbachev, and through a series of strange, coincidences, as in much of life, I was to be part of a panel and discussing this whole question of the future. And so I was with right next to me was the president of Mexico, and there are Nobel Prize winners on the stage, and so I was nervous. I just thought, whoa. And then so I was up there on stage, and this guy came up, and he looked like he surprised me, because I thought he was I actually thought he was a janitor, but he was like a really high class janitor, because he had like a suit on. But the way he came up to me, he introduced himself, and he said, "Hi, I'm Lee," and I thought, great, friendly janitors. Lee, it's Brian, put it there. Okay. And I'm still just like trying to get ready, the talk's ready to begin. And then a couple minutes later, General Lee Butler sat down next to me, okay, the head of the Strategic Air Command, all right, very young-looking guy. And so I was seated between General Lee Butler and Mikhail Gorbachev, right? And this amazing moment came when, well, one amazing moment was when I was up there talking, and Gorbachev was right next to me, and I had this weird feeling of, like, what if I all of a sudden just sort of jerked my elbow real hard and hit him? And I don't know why that violent notion came to me. Even though ever since I was a little kid, I was taught to sort of hate communism, right? So maybe it was surfacing, but it was like a weird feeling. But anyway, so violence was in my mind. I didn't want that. I love him. It just hit me. I don't know why. But then, so I sat down, and then General Lee Butler got up there, and this was the moment. So I'm sitting there looking at this, and this guy, General Butler, one of his major tasks was to determine where our ICBMs would be aimed. That's kind of a heavy responsibility. And so he is there, and he's standing up, and he is, as he's talking, I'm looking at Gorbachev right next to him, and I realize General Lee Butler had a lot of ICBMs aimed at the guy on his left. Amazing to think about. And probably, although Gorbachev probably didn't pick on General Lee Butler in particular, but probably it was back and forth. And here they were on stage together, and General Lee Butler saying, it was all a big mistake. The whole thing. We have got to move beyond this form of life. Incredible. And it all took place so quickly. Why? Why? Because they were living in that tension, the cataclysm itself. And through time, it broke down all of those enabling assumptions. They just couldn't any longer hold to them. They allowed the cataclysm to tear them apart. And just so quickly, we went from this amazing build-up of weapons to have them on the stage together like that. And so to return to the situation with the star, the supernova, just to return to that, it's the end of the story is the interesting part, of course, because you have the star, like I was talking about, that builds up all of these elements, and then all of a sudden it collapses down to zero. And then in a certain sense you'd think it'd be over, but you have this incredible moment where out of nowhere these elementary particles called neutrinos in this very, very dense space blow all of that star out into the universe. And you got to picture this. As the neutrinos blow the star out, well, let me tell you about the neutrinos first of all. They are the wispiest elementary particle we know about, in the sense that they're just so they're almost as close as you can get to non-entity. Because if you have the calculations are, if you have a light year of lead, like that's 6 trillion miles of lead, a neutrino can make it through the whole thing with a better than 50% chance of not touching a single particle. That's the ideal state if you're an introvert. In a crowded room, you can get out. But I mean, no, in other words, wispy. And yet, but the star when it collapses is so dense that what was insignificant can now blow the whole thing apart. And as it blows it apart, you have to see it kind of like as this explosion, because as it blows apart, all of the different elements are created. We had nothing but neutrons. And then suddenly you've got hydrogen, you've got helium, you've got oxygen, you've got carbon, you've got all of them. They all come flooding out. And they're poured out into the world, and then they enable, emeralds to come forth on planets, and rubies, and giraffes, all of that from that moment. And that, I think, that too is our moment. We're at a moment of that kind of enormous compression. To be alert is to know that's exactly where we are. And we are in the moment when all of these structures are being torn down. These are the structures that are causing the destruction. And as they are torn down, they are releasing us into the essential nature of who we are. So that as General Lee Butler is released from that, you see, then there's this pouring forth into the creativity necessary to build a new era of the Earth community. And that brings us to this whole notion, the power of synergy, building through synergy, which is our next power to discuss.